Hello, my name is Carlos Santos, and in this video, you will learn how to create and execute test cases in application integration. With application integration, you can create and run multiple test cases on your integrations to ensure that your integration is working as intended, without having to publish the integration. Let's take a look at how to get started. In this integration, we are processing orders where if an order is over $100, then a manual approval is required. Let's create a test to make sure that our logic is correct. We can see that the edge that connects the approval task has a condition that checks whether the total order value is greater than or equal to the threshold order value variable. If we look at that variable, we can see that it has a default value of $100. If the user approves, then processing the order proceeds. Now that we know a little bit about the logic, let's create our first test case. The first step to creating tests in application integration is to ensure that your integration is in the draft state. If your integration is in the published state, click Enable Editing to create a new version in the draft state. To create a test case, click the Test Case menu item and then click Create a new test case. The first case we'll test is to make sure an approval isn't needed when a small order is processed. So I'll select the Order Process API trigger as the trigger to test. I'm a fan of behavior-driven development, and so I'm going to borrow one of its concepts and use Gherkin's given when then convention for the name of the test. If you're not familiar with Gherkin, it provides a plain English way of describing a test case using the structure of given when then, which stands for given some initial state, when an action is taken, then verify an outcome. So I'll go with the name of given a small order, when processed, then no approval necessary, and click Create. And once we do that, the editor goes into test case mode. In this mode, you can configure values for the input variables. We'll select the trigger, and in the Test Configuration tab, we can see and edit the value for the input variables. We saw that the approval logic depends on the total of the order. Since our test case is about an order that doesn't require manual approval, let's make sure that the order total is less than the configured $100 threshold we saw earlier. Here you can see that the order total will be $34. The order is for one $10 item and 24 $1 items. So we're good here. Now let's change the approval task to fail the test if it doesn't get executed. We'll select the task. There are two configurations you can specify. The first is how to mock the task itself. You can select no mock and let it execute as it would during normal execution. You can also select mock execution, where you can have the task skipped and marked as successfully completed, or failure and mark it as failed. You can also select mock output, which allows you to specify the output of the task for the next node in the integration. The other configuration is the assertion strategy. This lets you specify one or more conditions that determine whether the task execution is deemed successful or not. You can select Assert Execution and then specify that the execution status should be either success or failure, or whether the task shouldn't have been executed at all. You can also use Assert Parameters to validate a condition on the selected parameter. You can do this for both input and output parameters. Lastly, you can create an assert condition where you can specify an expression to validate the values of variables, or whether or not that variable exists. For our test, we just want to make sure that the task isn't executed. So we'll set our assertion type to Assert Execution and the execution status to Assert to Not Executed. This will make sure that if the approval task is executed, that our test will fail. Since we aren't interested in the other tasks, we'll go ahead and set those to be skipped. Now we're ready to run the test. To run the test, let's go ahead and click the Test button. The Run Test Case page appears. We don't have to worry about changing the execution deadline, so we'll just click Run Test. As you can see, it succeeded. let's take a look at the logs from our details. We can see that the approval task was not executed. Now, just to show you how the test behaves when there is a failure, I'm going to introduce an error in the logic used to execute the approval task if the order is over $100. I'm going to go ahead and make it $1. We'll rerun the test. And now you can see that the test failed. Let's take a look at the logs again. Here you see that the approval task failed, and our error message tells us why the test failed. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this content informative. To learn more about application integration, visit the product page at cloud.google.com/application-integration.